Science has shown that you have to actually be asleep to truly evaluate the quality of a mattress. Assuming you don't want to spend the night in a mattress store, we've got the next best thing. Bed Match at Mattress Warehouse. Bed Match is our exclusive diagnostic system that recommends the mattresses that are right for you. Say goodbye to mattress shopping guesswork and hello to your best night's sleep ever in your own house. And hello, low prices guaranteed for 1 full year. Mattress Warehouse.
Before we begin, I wanted to give a huge shout out to the folks at Amazon Music for partnering with us on this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. But more on this later. Right then, let's get right into today's episode. Well then, folks, we need to ask ourselves one big question. What is it like to see a time bomb ticking? When all the hostilities that you see around finally come to life. When you know that everything that you see, all the niceness, all the smiles, all the pleasantries between two people are about to go down out of the window. It's time, ladies and gentlemen. The gloves are off. And yet another friendship, tell me about it. I've been so exasperated by that battle that I'm fumbling up my words, but why shouldn't you? Because when you see a race like that being decided in a manner like that, you just have to fall short of words. Kunal, another friendship ruined by Formula One? Are we on that course now?
It seems like it. Although I hope not, because, both drivers, very good, very likable. Yes, Max is very likable as well.
One second.
Lando Norris...
Very likable where and for which people?
Well, I used to drive a racing car, right? You want to do everything that Max does as a racing car driver, as a sportsman. Apps. Okay, you got me there. Well, yeah, I would still say everything. His ability to do whatever he can do in that car is incredible. But now suddenly we've got fan bases who are listening in go like, oh, dude, this guy is Max Pro or whatever. No, wait a minute. Just wait a minute. Since you asked me about friendship, Lando Norris has made it very clear. If he says something stupid, my respect for him is going to go. If he comes and tells me that what he did was wrong or why he did or whatever, then it still might be okay. So the story for Silverstone is not going to be whether they'll go wheel to wheel again, because they will. But will they go wheel to wheel again as friends? Did they play paddle midweek or not? That's going to be the story to follow, especially for Drive to Survive. And since we all love Drive to Survive.
But it's true. Relationships change when you go wheel to wheel with each other. Pironi and Villeneuve were not as bad until they went wheel to wheel. Same with Rosberg and Hamilton. Same with Senna and Prost. The moment you've collided with someone on track like this, you cannot emphasize on the way the relationship changes after that. And you could see it in Lando Norris's eyes. He looked genuinely disappointed in Max Verstappen in every single post-race interview that he's done. To the point where he's not even commenting on what Verstappen has done. He just says that I'm not the man to say anything. I think Max should. That speaks volumes. That really speaks volumes, Kunal. And I know as media, we tend to blow things up out of proportion sometimes. But this is it. This is the harsh reality of what it is. And Alex Jakes mentioned it so well on commentary. It was inevitable. At some point, it had to happen, right? All the pleasantries, all the niceness, all the goodwill and all the paddle games, they had to go sour at some point. As fans, we're lucky. But between the two of them, man, this is a story to brew and a new rivalry for us to enjoy.
And let's also explain why this was inevitable. To me, that's the more fun part, right? Because Lando Norris and Max Verstappen have finished 1-2 since. So their first 1-2 finish was in China, then in Miami, then in Imola, then in Canada, and then in Spain, right? And I think it was just once that Max Verstappen wasn't first and Lando Norris was, right? So it's about when was this equation finally going to blow up? And that blow up was all dependent on will Norris and McLaren actually deliver a fantastic race. We all spoke of, can they execute a race the way they need to take the challenge to Max Verstappen? And they did that in Austria. And that wheel-to-wheel battle was hence inevitable, right? And in all of this, there are two ways that we should discuss this. One is, of course, the sporting way. Was Max Verstappen wrong, or did he actually do right? Was Lando Norris going overboard on a few laps? Because while the drivers were battling, their engineers were literally doing what you do, Somil, which is give real-time commentary so that the race director picks things up, So there's a sporting aspect. And then there's, of course, the emotional and the more human aspect of things. And that's what Andrea Stella, the team principal of McLaren, has so eloquently said post-race. And he said a couple of things. He's like, Max went unchecked when he was going wheel-to-wheel against Lewis Hamilton in 2021. And this is now a fallout of that. Very, very brave of him to actually say that. I mean, Andrea Stella actually is a fantastic spokesperson. Okay. Then he also turned around and said that Red Bull and Max do not need to do this, that everyone has so much respect for Red Bull and Max that why would they compromise their reputation in such a manner? Okay. Very, very interesting. So we've already taken the step into the whole emotional aspect. I think we should just go ahead and speak about that.
Yeah, but I agree with Stella. They don't need to do this. And the only way I can give a judgment on what Max did is by asking a question. If you start to move under braking, how does a Formula One driver pass? Ever. How does he do it? Around the track? That's not legal. Inside cutting the grass? That's not legal. Pushing someone off? That's not legal. So how do you pass? And I'm not saying open up the DRS and make it happen. Stop it if you're thinking about that. Genuinely, that idea is horrendous. But realistically, if you have to go side by side with a driver, how do you pass if you start to move under braking? Just one simple question. And I think Max needs to learn the lesson by being behind once. Again, he's so good that he normally is never behind. But the day he is, I think that, he knows it very well. But that needs to change, right? Somewhere I feel that a 10-second penalty is not enough to change this genuinely dangerous style of driving. And that doesn't take away anything from how brilliant a driver he is. Like 4 tenths in qualifying, mind-blowing. A flawless race up until the point that Norris started to attack him. Brilliant so far in every race so far this year, and well managed on the tyre front, on the qualifying front, on the start front. Excellent everywhere, almost untouchable. But his one main, I wouldn't say weakness, but a slightly rough edge, which makes him who he is this. And I just feel a 10-second penalty isn't enough to paper over the cracks now. It's genuinely impossible to pass like that. And racing isn't meant to be impossible to pass. It's meant to be logically enough that you can pass.
For all our Dutch fans, we're not taking sides. We know there's millions of you tuning in from the Netherlands. We're not taking sides. We're just sort of pointing out that, yes, Max Verstappen doing what he does is box office. Do we love it? We absolutely do. Do we love wheel-to-wheel racing where wheels are banging? We absolutely do. So everyone, show me one fan who dislikes it, and that probably is not a fan, of Formula One. But we're just saying, how does one go wheel-to-wheel against Max if Max doesn't let them go wheel-to-wheel? If that's literally the question, right?
Yeah.
Because we want Norris to go wheel-to-wheel. We want a Hamilton. We want everyone. Max is saying, I want people to go wheel-to-wheel with me. But this whole you yield or we crash approach has to change at some point. And I know Max doesn't care about his legacy. All he cares about is winning. And that's what makes Max who he is. And Samuel, you said, Max actually was never behind. Well, you're right. But in the sprint yesterday, on Saturday, he was momentarily behind Norris. And that move into turn 4 was yet another you yield or we crash. But it was so Maxy, it was so ballsy because he went down the inside of turn 4, locked up his front right, rotated the car perfectly as Max Verstappen does, right? And yeah, I just wish it was a little more fair, little more, sporting for the other driver. And trust me, my Twitter's gone completely berserk. I've had people calling me names, telling me I don't understand racing, all of that. I don't care, people, what they say on Twitter. I know that this is polarizing the fan bases again, right? But this is not where motor racing should be. We want them to go wheel to wheel. And I'll also add another caveat here. Max moved under braking, which is allowed once. That's the rule for everyone tuning in, figuring what the hell just happened. Let me check out another podcast to see if they explain it. By the way, we've not done the intro yet. 10 minutes
we'll
in,
get
but
there.
that's how
It's such a good race that we'll probably need to do it in a bit, but we will.
Maybe this is the best intro. Maybe this is the best intro because we are sort of giving neutral but harsh neutral viewpoints, if that's where I may put it. But Formula One cars, just how many sharp edges do they have? They remind me of that Mad Max movie. One touch on the wheel and boom, you have two wheels that just get punctured. That's what
Careful
happened.
with your words. Mad Max is probably not the right word for today.
Okay.
Just kidding.
For those of you listening on the audio, you should tune into the video. Actually, that was a complete. I didn't know that, but anyway.
We're not taking
Time
sides.
to do the
We're
introduction.
not taking sides. But no, fair point, right? Because you just can't go racing. And to me, as sad as it sounds, this race once again proves why Formula One races are just not won by battling on track. They are won in three key moments: the start, the pit stop, and the way you manage the stint between the pit stops. Everything else with this way of driving and with these sort of sharp cars and this sort of technology like DRS is utterly futile. Terrible statement, I know, but somewhere down the line, we need to change this. But in my head, right, I just need to now tell you this piece of information, which baffles me even more, and is something that we already know, but it just gives you a good idea of what sort of a driver Max is. The moment that really sort of annoyed me, even though I have the most respect for Max and what he does, which you can listen to in all the other episodes and find out, we've been praising him so much because he has been excellent. But he didn't let go of Lando Norris and pushed him into the grass even when he knew he had a puncture. 7-time world champion or not, greatest human being on earth or not, this in a racing manner is terrible. Let him go. You have a puncture. Don't force him into the grass. That just makes him who he is. That's the kind of driver he is. But to me, if you are handing out penalties, that should be penalty number 2 for sure. That was terrible.
This is where I was going to say you should do the introduction, but I'm going to just say one thing before you go to the introduction 12 minutes in. I actually loved that part of Max Verstappen. First part was when he actually got hit at the entry of the corner. Then Max turned in a particular way where he would get hit. Max knew that's it. That's the end of it. I'm sure these drivers know they can just feel the hit when it happens. The mid corner was when he turned again in a way that they had. So to me, that's awareness. And I love Max Verstappen for that. He's like, screw it. My race is gone. I'm just going to use all my awareness I can to screw the other driver's race because, hey, you screwed mine, and you're going racing. And then when he actually acted in that whole puncture manner that you explained, I sort of loved that. I said, wow, that kind of ruthlessness is sort of what I really love about Max Verstappen. Okay, and I'm not saying this for the Dutch basis. I'm not saying that's the right thing or wrong. Okay,
but isn't that the kind of stuff that gets you called stuff which starts with an A and ends with a hole? That would, right? In any other sport, if you do that.
Well, we should just ask Max why he moved left under braking, closer to the entry of turn 3. That's where it is. And this is where, Samuel Aurora, you can now cue the introduction.
So, folks, this is not a Max Verstappen hate podcast. We still very much love him. Should we turn on him now? We absolutely shouldn't. We just need to call out things that are there as well. And before I tell you who we are, a quick word. It's not that he's not matured, because had this been 2018, had he been clipped by another driver, or had he had the same incident when he was in his early years in Formula One, he would have stormed to the media and would have annoyed the life out of everyone. He would have complained like a kid. But the first thing he said when he went to the media? He said, I'll check the footage and I'll see if I've done something wrong. And the only thing he was annoyed about was not the crash, but the mistakes by Red Bull that led to the crash, which we should also discuss in the other part of this podcast. This just simply means He's evolving. He's maturing. We don't hate him. Just need to call out some things the way they are. And that's what we are on the Inside Line F1 podcast. We try to be as unbiased as we can until there's some chatter about Jenson Button, Fernando Alonso, or Carlos Sainz. He is my favorite. But again, we are the top 1.5% of all listened podcasts on Spotify. And we've also been awarded India's best sports podcast across all sports, that is. So that's us. My name is Somal Arora. I'm the voice of the MotoGP Indian Grand Prix, the Indian Racing League, the Indian Supercross Racing Championship, and so many others as well. And you were also listening, and you will also be listening to Kunal Shah, the former marketing head of the Force India Formula One team, currently an FIA-accredited Formula One journalist working with the Viaplay network, who, if you don't know, are the people who show you the live footage of Verstappen and Norris racing in such an entertaining manner. He is the one who's producing the post and pre-shows for that. So that's who we are. And we're also missing F1 Stats Guru, our in-house stats legend, who's a part of the WTF1 talent pool and is one of the most followed stats pages on the internet, whose stats, by the way, have been picked up by Crofty, Autosport.com, Motorsport.com, you name it, and his stats are there. Get well soon, man. But coming back to the whole point, what do we talk of first? Do we talk about the race winner 15 minutes into the race? Or do we still have something to say on...
I think we still... Let's put it this way. Everyone listening in is more curious about what actually happened. Who gives the most biased, unbiased, neutral, aggressive views on Verstappen versus Norris? Everyone wants that. Yeah. That's the blockbuster part. Yes, George Russell won his second race win, but he won a race where he was 15 seconds behind the crashing pair. Okay. So anyway, we'll get to you, George. Don't worry.
15 seconds later.
This whole 15 minutes maybe, given how much we love dissecting these things, because we, of course, try and apply a layer of what you see, I see, and all the neutrality that we try and bring into to what we do, Somal. But in the whole Verstappen-Norris thing, another very interesting thing, the headlines, like you pointed out just before that introduction, by the way, thank you, was... Max Verstappen wanted to point out the mistakes that Red Bull made in the race. So every time there was a question about what happened with Norris, he actually, but we shouldn't have gotten into that situation. We made a mistake, right? Whereas Norris's headlines were all about the friendship. Okay. And to me, whether there's a friendship or not, that's the main question, because definitely there is no world championship for Norris in 2024. Come what may, Max is going to just seal it. It's all about, again, which race is he going to do it? Is he going to get naughtier while he does it, etc., because that's going to be the key part. But I don't care about the friendship, but it's always good to see these trends, like you said at the start. The minute you go wheel to wheel, especially in this harsher manner, it affects your off-track relationships. And if we go back to Spain, where Max Verstappen won again, you remember there was one thing he said, Somal, which was, we need to add performance to the car because we cannot rely on a perfect execution of a race weekend every race weekend. And guess what? For the first time in many, many races, we saw Red Bull make two mistakes in the race today. First was, of course, that 6-second pit stop that they had, which suddenly cut down his 7-8 second lead to 2 seconds. And that got Lando Norris within charging distance. And then, of course, this whole debate of whether they should have just gone longer in the second stint and so on, which, in time, Red Bull will just know what was what.
Yeah, but you see the way Max has matured now? He's evolved. He's a machine. He's not focusing on any of these things. He's just focused on efficiency, optimization, which is why Red Bull are where they are. So at the end of it all, it's just mind-blowing that he's still able to do what he does. And with that, we should talk a little bit more about the driver of our weekend overall. Formula One, well, the official driver of the day was Lando Norris. We had more than just one race this weekend. I'm sort of torn apart between Russell and Piastri. I want to talk about Piastri before we go to Russell, because that's a different story altogether. And Piastri has a big helping hand in Russell's story. But you have something to say?
Yeah, but we are still not done talking of Norris and
we are not.
And Verstappen.
Oh, go ahead. Tell me more.
No, I'll tell you one point. we need to commend McLaren again for having a car which works around Austria, which is a great thing. Last year in Austria is when they got their big upgrades and they suddenly, metamorphized into the team that they are now. This year, they were again the fastest car through the weekend. They should have won. They could have won. It's again down to that.
But, sorry, a point on that before you just say that. They should have. But Max Verstappen in qualifying, oh my God, what a lap. How did he do that?
How did he? That's the Max Verstappen magic. So I would choose Max as my driver of the weekend. Doesn't matter what he did with Norris. It was one small blip, however you see it, over a weekend of fantastic performance, especially now that they're under pressure. I mean, P1 to P19 in Q1 of qualifying was 0.598 seconds. Zhou Guanyu, who was 20th, was actually 2/10 off whoever was P19. I think it was Logan Sargent.
Of course.
And I was just like, dude, when everyone else is within half a tenth, why are you at 2/10? You just messed up the whole number. Okay. And then guess what? In Q3, Max Verstappen pulls 4/10 on P2. So we've gone from the narrowest gap ever in the history of qualifying, especially since this format was adopted, right? 7/10, narrowest gap between P1 to P20, to the longest or the largest or the widest gap all season between P1 and P2 in Q3. So that's what Max Verstappen did with that lap. And after he put that lap, I said, there's no way he's losing that race. But I was so wrong. But I'll tell you the point that I was trying to make. If you remember the last couple of races, we questioned again, should McLaren have just followed what Red Bull was doing and chased them? Right? We actually use that as an example to say you don't chase Red Bull for just 10% of the race. You chase them for 100% of the race. Sawmill, they actually did that. Every lap, every pit stop this race, they pitted exactly at the same time on the same lap as Max Verstappen. Just to be like, if we know we're quicker than him, let's just put on the same tires or whatever, get onto the same strategy and chase him down, right? For once, I actually wondered if McLaren and Norris's strategy to pit on the same lap was to try and force Red Bull into an unsafe release, because it happened the first time. Okay. And when it happened the second time, they actually held Max Verstappen back. So first I thought maybe they've just held Max back to be a little cautious. But of course, it turned out that I think his left rear wheel nut just took longer or whatever. But yeah, so hats off and full marks to McLaren for chasing Red Bull for all 60 whatever laps of the race.
Good point. And that does save you time, because if you hold a driver back slightly as well, gives you a tenth there, a second there, here and there, which you would die for in normal racing circumstances. But this is where we have to bring in a question from one of our followers on social media. It's one from Uttara that we need to address. And she says, Norris was trailing Verstappen by around 6 seconds before the pit stops, bringing him in for new tyres before Max would have potentially put him in between Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. Was there a strategic reason for not attempting an undercut on Max at this point? Considering the potential time gain from fresher tyres, would this have been a viable option for the team to consider? Then you've sort of answered that question in a way, haven't you, Kunal? Because when we spoke about this in the Spanish GP review, the whole point was, can McLaren annoy Red Bull for the whole race? They need to pressure him all the way throughout. And eventually, there was no incentive to go for an undercut in the second stint, because as you rightly mentioned, he would have been between Russell and Hamilton, which is counterproductive. Why do you want to put your driver in dirty air? And in the first stint, it was just a case of McLaren, at least at what it looks like from the outside, trying to stick around with Max and trying to be on the same strategy so that they can avoid what happened in Spain, which was eventually going off strategy and Verstappen gaining advantage through having more fresh air. Well, interesting scenario now. And McLaren are opting to pressure Red Bull Racing so much and so consistently. But she's also asked another question on Sergio Perez, which I think we should touch upon very, very briefly before we talk about all the other stuff.
No. I think you need to bring out your C3 insight as well, Sawmill, because, ladies and gentlemen, Sawmill has actually been digging a lot more into the data to figure out what he should actually say he's figured out.
No. Totally forgot about that. But no, it's interesting. We mentioned this in the preview. Miami. What compound of tire got Lando Norris the win? And I'm not saying the tire he finished the race on, the tire on which his stint made him go above all the others. It was the C3. Count a year back, Austrian GP 2023. On what tire compound did Lando Norris do so well that he ended up beating Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton, cars that were significantly faster than the McLaren before that race? It was the C3 hard compound tire. In the preview, we told you, watch out for McLaren on that C3 tire compound, the hard compound tires this time out. And believe it or not, Lando was actually closing up to Max when he was on that hard. Eventually, of course, it took a terrible pit stop from Red Bull Racing to get McLaren back in the mix, and by that point, they were all on the mediums. But still, it counts. It's an interesting trend. C3 is something that has been working for them so much. It didn't work out in one occasion, which is what we dug up together, Montreal, where again, the conditions were probably not quite right and there was a wet track sort of switch around, and so it was ideal to be on the softer compound tires. But generally, it seems like an interesting trend that McLaren are doing quite well with that C3 tire compound. So follow it along, keep checking. If it's the C3, check the performance between Red Bull and McLaren and see if there are any marginal gains, because it just so can happen that a certain car's philosophy can suit a certain tire compound, like Mercedes perform better under cooler conditions and something of that sort. Hard to explain exactly why. We're not the best people. We should probably ring up James Allison and the likes to tell more about why that is. But it's an interesting phenomenon that is appearing.
It is. So this is where we can actually, 26 minutes into the podcast, talk about George Russell winning.
Do we want to?
He picked up. No, we should.
We should.
I think he of course picked up the pieces that were left, literally the debris and the points and the win by Norris and Verstappen.
And he picked up a smile on Toto's face. Actually, not a smile, a smug on Toto's face. Did you see that shot, Kunal?
Yeah, but I think George Russell is not going to get his race win bonus from Toto Wolff for that expletive-laden radio message when Mercedes' chief motivation officer, Toto Wolff, came onto the radio saying, George, we can win this, whatever. And
chief motivation officer, man. How do you come up with this stuff?
That's some things that I'm good at, which is CRAP instead of CAR. But anyway, that's a daddy joke there. But no, I think he was in the mix. 15 seconds off, but he was in the mix. But that's what you do. He actually said this yesterday. I hope Lando and Max have their own battle and they go so off that I just jump into the lead. And that's what happened.
Oh, did he?
Right. Yeah, he actually said that post-qualifying.
Nice.
So that's the... But think of it this way. Now, this is the progress Mercedes has made since their front wing introduction that happened in Monaco, right? Because there were two other times when Red Bull dropped the ball in the races this season, in Australia and in Monaco. Yep. And guess who picked up the pieces? Ferrari. One each for Sainz and Leclerc. Okay. But now it's no longer Ferrari that's there to pick up the pieces. Carlos Sainz was third at best. Okay. Despite being ahead of George through a good start, but he then got overtaken and so on. So Ferrari has dropped back in that battle for the top three. They're at best the fourth fastest team now. Okay. And then who else has Red Bull hired and sort of extended a contract till end of 2025 to pick up the pieces? Checo Perez, right? And Checo Perez has now been 6 consecutive races that he's gone without a podium finish. Can you imagine?
Why are you expecting one? You're the only one who's tracking that number, you know, right? That's what makes us so good. Again, we're not blowing our own trumpets, but that's why we are so meticulous. We just keep on digging into things that nobody digs into. Here we are.
And we have a lot of Mexican fans who, of course, are wondering when that spell is going to break. But yeah, I mean, in all fairness, Checo actually had damage from the opening lap. He's posted a big picture of that damage or a picture of that big damage on his Instagram just to say, hey guys, I actually was off, which I can understand he was struggling. But yeah, there we go. So Mercedes picked it up. It wasn't Lewis Hamilton. It was George Russell, his second race win. I don't believe it changes anything in the Constructors' Championship because Mercedes is now on 196 points. McLaren is on 268 points. And Ferrari is on 291 points. So if anything that this result will do is what we'll find out maybe 10 races down the line when Mercedes end up overtaking Ferrari despite being 100 points off, because Mercedes' points haul from the race weekend, Sommel, was 45 points.
Lovely.
Which is beautiful.
That's a big haul. That's a big meaty bite into Ferrari.
Yeah, first and fourth. Yeah, absolutely. So Mercedes did, I would say, very well. Toto Wolff, that smug, came out extremely well. And it, of course, George Russell is now, has won at the Red Bull Ring in GP3, in Formula 2, and in Formula 1.
Not bad, huh?
Yeah, not bad.
But, this is the reason why following an entire race is so important. Because whenever we see something like this happening, when the leaders take themselves out, it's always the best of the rest who emerges. Throughout the entire race, raise your hands up. And again, it's not a cultural forceful thing that you have to track every driver, every single lap. Sometimes it's just nice to. But raise your hands if you were genuinely following what was happening to George Russell. Not many people, including myself, can say that. It's only at the halfway mark where I was just checking and thinking, okay, who's the best of the rest now that these guys are doing so well? And one of the big reasons why George Russell eventually came to that position where he did come to, a big part of it comes down to the man who was second. Had Oscar Piastri not gotten that time penalty, I can't imagine Russell, okay, he has had better starts, yes, but I can't imagine Russell having a sustained advantage over that McLaren over the course of that race and eventually being in that position where he gets to pick up the scraps. Big hand, thanks to Oscar Piastri. He finished second. But the big story here is he beat Lewis Hamilton fair and square. Decisive pass at the start, got that position back, and his strategy wasn't anything fantastic. It wasn't anything that can blow you apart. It's just a normal, well-driven race, assisted by the fact that his teammate got into a few muddles, by the fact that Ferrari just were completely off the pace, consistently around a tenth and a half slower than the Mercedes and the McLarens, and also by the fact that Piastri was nowhere to be seen and Perez, as always, unfortunately, was at the back. That's all it takes. One good, level-headed weekend, and you can maximize things. And operational efficiency is something that we've been tagging along with Red Bull for so long. Mercedes have nailed it once again.
Yeah, they did. And, very interesting question that George Russell was asked post-race, saying Mercedes was 15, 16 seconds off, whatever, when the crash happened. Should they really celebrate this win, which technically isn't a win? And George actually gave a very interesting answer, saying you have to celebrate a high moment when it comes in Formula One because you never know when it's going to come again. Yeah. Okay. And the same thing Carlos Sainz said, even though I don't know what I'm going to do next year, I'm going to celebrate this podium. And then for all those wanting to know what George Russell is going to do to celebrate, he said, even if my celebrations are 50% of what Lando Norris's celebrations are, my celebrations are going to be a lot of fun. So that's where he left it at. But talking of Oscar Piastri.
Do we want to analyze his celebrations now? I think because it was very lukewarm. Like when he was on the radio, when someone wins from such a position, you expect them to go ballistic, like whoa, yes, whoa. He's like, yabba good one, nice one, boys. Come on, George. It's a race win. It's not a podium. Again, just my qualms with him.
A race win could have been for Oscar Piastri.
Yeah.
Though that track limits was so strange, Sommel. And Oscar Piastri actually said two things. He's like, you've gone and put solutions at turns 9 and 10. You invested money to bring solutions to actually take track limits out of the equation. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly at turn 6, you're like, wow, no, but not turn 6, because that's not the track where we can put, gravel on or whatever, even though there was gravel. And then he was tracked via a helicopter shot, which no other car was tracked using. And the resolution was so bad that there was a lot of
Yeah.
shadow. And then, of course, McLaren protested. But this is again where McLaren needs to pick up the pace. McLaren protested. They sent the letter to the clerk of the course instead of the steward. So that was one strike. They did not state which part of the regulation they were addressing. So that was another strike.
boy.
And there was a third strike as well. So the protest was deemed inadmissible.
Oh boy.
Okay. Because it wasn't within the template and the format of what the FIA and the teams have agreed a protest format should be. Yes, I'm not making this up. I'm not
No
making this up.
way.
Either way, so Oscar Piastri feeling like this win could have been his is a genuine feeling. I would say so. That, yeah, could have, would have, should have. We can leave it at that. But
Wait.
Ferrari definitely couldn't feel that this win would have been there. Carlos Sainz was very candid, saying this. I was going to finish P5. It's just because of 2 cars ahead of me, I got onto the podium, so that was fine. But the focus for me wasn't on Carlos Sainz's race. The focus for me was on Charles Leclerc's race.
Yeah.
So of course he had that opening lap damage, and then Brian Bossie, his new engineer, who of course is backed by the strategy and every other engineering team that feeds into Charles's race, right? So he's the main contact to Charles, but that doesn't mean he does the strategy, okay, necessarily. So at the beginning of the race, they actually said, we predict that we had the pace to finish in the points, okay. And then mid-race, they actually said, well, we changed our prediction. We don't think you're going to get the points. Poor Charles. Okay, but of course, Charles, gave some context. He said, I was a back marker, and as a back marker, I was losing just so much time behind, letting people, lap me, that I was just not able to focus on my race. And that's probably what happened to Leclerc. And interestingly, Sommel, so there were 7 out of 10 teams that scored points, which means Sauber, Williams, and Aston Martin didn't score points, right? But to me, this was one of those races where a back marker was actually unlapping themselves very, very frequently. I saw that with Lance Stroll, and I'm like, wait a minute. Where on earth did Lance Stroll overtake a Mercedes? Because Mercedes is running high up, right? Yeah. I was just puzzled till I realized that it was a back marker. Max Verstappen at one point was more worried about the Haas's who were coming to unlap themselves. So very interesting when you come to a short circuit. Like suddenly the back markers on fresher tires are just go faster than you.
Yeah, barely any corners, right? So that also helps out so much. But I like the fact that you brought out Haas here. We need to touch upon that. It's a serious talking point. Basically, what we need to do now is to honor the Americanness of Haas and only race at speedways, because it's very clear. The lower the number of corners, the higher the Haas's finish. Because that means less opportunities for Kevin Magnussen to be a bully and take everyone out. P6 and P8 is incredible. Now, I said that because in the middle of that race, firstly, he passed Nico Hülkenberg because Hülkenberg had a bit of a bad stop, so he fell back into Magnussen's hands. And eventually, again, you need to understand that if your teammate's on a different strategy, let him go. Magnussen being Magnussen, fair enough. He said, okay, I'm going to pass. But the radio message after that was the weird one, where Haas just subtly reminded him, Kevin, Nico's on a different strategy. I think we should probably let him go. He said, do I have to conserve, or does Nico also have to conserve? Again, love that spirit about him. He's like, the engineer, what did he say, Kunal? He said both of them, didn't he?
Yeah. So they said, he said, F that. That's what Magnussen's reply was.
Tire management.
Yeah. Okay, because the message was that both of them have to conserve. And then when Nico was told the same thing, you need to bring in the tires and these tires will go to the end, whatever the typical tire management messages they get. And he also asked saying, yeah, well, we got to go do that together. And I just love Kevin Magnussen's absolute Nordic approach, straight face, to the point, just say it as it is. And Nico was, knowing him, he's a nice guy, like sort of goes around the bush and says, oh, but we both have to do it. But in all fairness, Haas's best result in Austria since 2022, when they again finished 6th and 8th. Okay, 6th was Schumacher, 8th was Magnussen. So 8th place is Magnussen, come what may. The 6th place is what just changed between their German driver. But I would say great result on merit. I mean, they finished ahead of Checo Perez. And since we mentioned radio message of Magnussen was pissed post race because there was some multifunction message that he was given, which he couldn't figure or he couldn't put in, and then he was expressing it to his race engineer. And then his race engineer said, "My bad, but I think Ferrari gave us the wrong setting." Okay,
Yeah.
literally said that. So, but either way, Haas is now 10 points ahead of Alpine in P7 in the Constructors' Championship. And Nico Hülkenberg actually said post-race, "We are doing things differently. We are doing things more efficiently this season." And I'm glad it's actually all showing for Haas.
It is. It is. And genuinely, I think they managed their race very well. To be at that scenario where you're holding off Sergio Perez, even though he has damage, yes, but you are on harder tires that are 12 laps older. Fair play, Hulkenberg, man. That is a good drive. That's the kind of stuff that gets you a factory contract. Again.
Indeed,
Yeah.
what a lifesaver, that Audi contract. And if they hit gold with that Audi package, which Christian Dana, literally the German Formula One expert who was on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, said that Audi is a long way to actually making any inroads into Formula One if they have to. But another team that needs to make inroads is Aston Martin. Clearly completely off. Fernando Alonso even more off. He went into Zhou Guanyu of all the people. I mean, I would never imagine Zhou Guanyu and Fernando Alonso sharing the same piece of tarmac beyond the opening lap, because Fernando is just Fernando, miles ahead as he should be. But Fernando Alonso stood out 2 times in the race weekend. Okay, or maybe 3 times. Okay. First is he got a front row view of the Alpine battle between Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly. And what did he say? Wow. He said, wow. And then wow was his chosen race message on the radio for several other instances. He also said wow when he was informed that he had a time penalty. Okay. And this is where here's a very short trivia for you, which I know you're going to pass, because I could ask you something like what happened in 1965 on race 6, lap 7, and you'd remember. So my trivia is actually like baby trivia for you. But how many world champions on the grid in 2024?
Alonso, Verstappen, and Hamilton. That's all.
How many world champions got a time penalty in the 2024 Austrian Grand Prix?
Verstappen, Hamilton, and Fernando Alonso.
Can you imagine? And Hamilton picked it up for crossing the white line at pit exit.
That's a scary moment.
Fernando
now.
Alonso for
There's a
the white line on pit exit? Really?
No.
He seemed like he was in control.
The pit entry, wasn't it? Like,
Oh, the pit entry. Sorry. Yeah, but it seems like he's done it a long, long time, Fernando Alonso for taking Zhou Guanyu, bumping into him turn 3, and Max Verstappen for doing what he did with Lando Norris, which we spent more than 40% of this episode talking about. But so Fernando Alonso's wow messages were absolutely gold standard for me. And now Aston Martin, Sommel, has gone 2 races without scoring points.
Yikes.
Okay, and they've not scored points in 3 out of the last 4 races. So Canada was the only last race they scored points, whatever. And then Racing Bulls is 28 points away from Aston Martin. Okay,
wow.
But the Hamilton pit entry thing, I still don't know how Oscar Piastri even spotted
Exactly.
that. When he went to the radio and he sort of called him out. I'm like, dude, how on earth did you see that?
Exactly. How did he do that? I don't get it. The eyes on that guy is something else. I really want to touch upon him as well, because firstly, that was unnatural. But then secondly, he's showing a great sense of decisiveness, which I didn't quite see, and which we all didn't quite see with one Alex Albon at this very stage of his career. I know he was racing up against far more tougher drivers like Lewis Hamilton, who didn't quite give him the room. But with Oscar Piastri, the way he's pulling off moves with certainty. Same track, same place. Albon a few years ago, Piastri now. You see a little bit of difference. You just get a belief that this guy will make it to the end. When Sergio Perez pushed him out at the first lap and Oscar went wide, he recovered it incredibly. then to come back and hang it around the outside of Sergio Perez once more at that same corner and to make it work. Man, you talk about Aussie grit, this guy has got it all. Again, in the sprint as well, that move on Lando Norris, decisive. He had one shot, he took that one shot. This guy is going places. I mean, I just can't wait to see what happens when the luck favors him, when he's just able to get those last couple of tenths in the tire management phase in the race all around. And then, for all we know, it could be a wonderful, wonderful three-way battle at the top. And it could happen next week because Silverstone is meant to be McLaren's best circuit of all of them. So I think we're in for a good race next time out.
We should. High speed, extremely. Lots of drivers love the race circuit just because it's an absolute driver's circuit. The home of Formula One, the mecca of motorsport, the history, the legacy that the circuit itself stands for. I'm excited to see what happens at Silverstone. And like we asked, the World Championship is not going anywhere else but Max Verstappen's way, going by the looks of it. The main question is, does the friendship between Norris and Verstappen actually remain as is, or will there be another crack at it at Silverstone? Will it stand the test of Formula One? Let's look out for that.
Yeah, we'll answer. Rather, we should discuss those questions in more depth when we come for our British GP preview very, very shortly. So stay tuned on the Inside Line F1 podcast. Subscribe to us. Follow us on all of our social media channels, and we'd love to take any of your questions for the preview as well. That's been all from myself, Somal Arora, and also from Kunal Shah. Thank you for listening, folks. We will see you in a couple of days for the British GP preview. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. Before we ended, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Amazon Music once again for partnering with us on this episode of the podcast.
Five Below means hot stuff, cool prices, and the best kind of fun anywhere. The trends you see all over your feed can be yours for way less than the rest. Like can't keep in stock candy and snacks, brand name beauty, the latest tech, room decor, and lots more. Plus, get extreme value finds you just have to see to believe in our 5 Beyond shop. Yep, you could say we're kind of a big deal here. Shop over 1,600 stores nationwide and fivebelow.com.